So if all of you are okay, we're going to go into quiet mode, and I'm going to play the zikr, and we'll have the screen sharing on. So people logging in early, they'll be able to know that this will be starting. When I stop the audio at 8 o'clock, Dr. Aslam, you can just take over then. I'm not going to do any announcement. I'll just stop it at 8 o'clock within 2 minutes.
Okay. Okay. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أحمده وأصلي على رسوله الكريم خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. Welcome back to the program jointly sponsored by the World Council of Muslims for Interfaith Relations, Stand with Dignity, and Islamicity, based in Culver City, on sacrifice and reflection in the and reformation in the context of the tragedies that took place in Karbala some 1400 years ago, and that still echo in our minds and in our hearts. For the last several days, we have been talking with different scholars from the Shia and the Sunni communities about issues that we face in this country. We talked about homelessness. We talked about we called racism. And today we want to focus on the issue of poverty, because the struggles of Imam Hussein was for justice and was for bringing reformation that involved the upliftment of the life of individuals who were living in that area and under the domain of what was called the Muslim state. So the poverty, of course, is one of the issues that impact a large number of people. We know that in this country, approximately 10.6% of the population is declared below the poverty line, and that poverty line is arbitrarily decided by the government. It was in 1964 that Lyndon B. Johnson declared war on poverty. And immediately after that, we came up with the definition. We asked people how much they would spend minimum for the diet. And then we multiplied it by 3 to come up with a figure. At that time, it was $3,900 that was considered the poverty line. In 2021, that figure has reached to approximately $26,000. But if we calculate the numbers given by various other poverty-related groups, you find that the actual amount is 56,000, and that basically increases the number of those living below the poverty line in 24% or more than 24%. And the number of Muslims, of course, especially those who are living in inner cities and those who are living, in the African American communities, is much higher than the 17 or 10.6%. If you calculate the number, you would find that among Muslims, that number reaches to 17%. If we calculate 17, 10 point, $26,000 figure, and if we calculate $58,000, that number reaches nearly 33%, and that's a huge number. Yet the Muslim community is said to be one of the most flourishing and most prosperous community. And the Quran is very specific about those kind of things. It addresses the issue of poverty. It addresses the issue of, what you call the powerlessness of the people as far as the economic and financial resources are concerned. So today we would have the discussion on this particular issue, and we would see in what manner Muslim community could be a catalyst for bringing about changes. When we talk of changes, we obviously refer to the structural changes, as well as the changes that are within the confines of each and every one of us through voluntary efforts. But we know it very well without bringing about structural changes. I mean, things that deal with the policies, we would not be able to bring about much desired changes. So I think I would invite Dr. Waldry, who is the co-host of this particular program, to introduce the speaker and to share his vision and his perspective. And then we would have our guest speakers talking about those issues. And then we will, inshallah, move forward in the direction of the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Aslam, for those introductory remarks. And I'd like to welcome our guest today, Dr. Charania, who I will introduce in a few moments. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Sayyidina wa nabiyyina Abul Qasimi Muhammad. Friends, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dr. Aslam talked about the subject today, which is the subject of poverty. And within the numbers and the statistics and the fundraising and the assistance and all that, there is one aspect that sometimes gets hidden, perhaps, and that is the issue of human dignity, which is connected to poverty. And Imam Hussain alayhi salam sets out on his journey with the idea of Islah, and the core idea in terms of the Islah that he had set out to go to Karbala was truly the overarching theme of human dignity. And I'd like to focus our attention to begin with so that we have a right frame of mind. And I want to start with a scenario that a lot of us, in fact, most of us will resonate with. And stay with me, if you will, just for a few seconds, so that I paint this picture of a rainy and a cold morning. You're driving your way to work. And as you wait at a red light, You look across the intersection and notice an older gentleman carrying a garbage bag, wearing no coat, carrying no umbrella, and getting soaking wet in the rain. You look closer. He's walking in shoes that are perhaps completely ripped apart at the soles. The traffic light turns green. You drive on with pain in your heart. You get to the office and the rest of the world takes over. How many of us can admit that on just one day, you make that split-second decision to turn your car around from the direction that you're heading and follow this gentleman? I'm ashamed to admit that I'm yet to do that. Some might say, well, this is a systemic problem. What difference can I make by doing that on that day? And truly, just as a lizard was trying to put drops of water to cool down the fire of Namrud, that lizard was told, what difference will it make? And the lizard said, on the day of judgment, I will tell my maker that I tried. And the idea of human dignity is something that is so important. In this case, my empathy should have alerted me to that, and it should have told me that the fundamental need of human dignity of this man, his state aside, his poverty in terms of money and in terms of his state aside, the need of his human dignity wasn't being met. And this one gentleman on the street, under those circumstances, truly looked and acted like he had lost his dignity. I dare say that poverty, strife, hunger targets our very human dignity. That suffering, that lack of security, seeing it up so close perhaps suggests that often we do not look closely at those facing hunger and poverty because on some primal level, perhaps it ignites the fear in us of our own human condition. Allahu Alam, he knows better. You know, on the Declaration of Independence, we are given certain inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But as a member of human species, we are born with even more basic rights. The primary one, as I said, being the right to human dignity, to which food, clothing, and shelter are fundamental, but it is really the idea of that human dignity. The existence of the poor and the rich in the world is as old as humanity itself. And if the ancient civilizations that we find that both the upper and the poor classes become defining parts of that society. In different eras across history, many attempts were made to eradicate poverty, but with little or no success. Today, the gap between the rich and the poor is increasing at an alarming rate. On the one hand, we have the elite, which has easy access to all the necessities and luxuries. However, on the other hand, we have a great majority of people, termed as poor, living from hand to mouth. And in theory, from our pulpits, our Jummah khutbahs, we are told that Islam promotes the elevation of human dignity through its practice, such as giving the mandatory charity to help the poor, meaning zakat, with these basic needs of food, shelter, clothing, education, and of course the voluntary charity, sadaqah. And we believe that this obligatory giving called zakat is actually the right of the poor and not just something that's nice for us to do. That we aren't doing a favor to the poor, but rather they are doing us a favor by helping us fulfill our obligations. A question that begs the answer is, despite the strong emphasis on sadaqah and zakat, the poverty in the majority Muslim lands is not an exception. In fact, all the more so. Why? And this will be our first discussion. And the second discussion is that there is a perception, as Dr. Aslam mentioned, that Muslims in America fare better socioeconomically than other minority Muslim populations around the globe. That American Muslims are well integrated in the mostly so-called mainstream, in the ever-expanding universe of successful Muslim entrepreneurs helps further this narrative. But these perceptions mask the tale of American Muslim poverty. The ISPO's 2018 American poll shows us a different picture. The research found that 18% of American Muslims report a household income of above 100,000, compared to 31% of Americans generally. But 33% make less than 30,000, the poverty level that we talk about, compared to 24% of Americans generally, a level below the federal poverty line, depending on the household size. So, as discussed previously, American Muslims are incredibly diverse, and if we examine the demographic factors, Black Muslim households are more likely than any other Muslim racial group to earn less than 30,000 a year. More racial parity exists at the higher end of the income spectrum, with Arab households only slightly more likely than other Muslims to report incomes of over 75,000. So the second question we need to address is, what can be done right in our own backyard? And that brings me on to introducing our guest today. Inshallah, we will discuss these two subjects with our guest and my co-host, Dr. Aslam. Dr. Charania, born in India, raised in Pakistan, educated in the UK, and now in the USA, is truly an international citizen. He is a surgeon, a lawyer, and an author, as well as a keen student of comparative religion. He studied Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam under the religious literacy at the Harvard X. His impressive accomplishments as a passionate humanitarian include consultancies at UNICEF and World Health Organization, as well as research at the International Council of Iodine Deficiency Disorders, helping and has worked on the eradication of IDD from the mountainous areas of Pakistan. In addition to his position as faculty of the Aga Khan University Hospital, Dr. Charania has held many leadership positions in the Ismaili Muslim community for the last 6 decades. Presently, he chairs the advisory board of the Ibn Sina Foundation, and also is on the advisory board of the North American University. He's president of iHelp, and is on the board of iSeek and CU'd the North American chapter, and a trustee of the Eternal Gandhi Museum here in Houston. Dr. Barkat is particularly concerned about the growing poverty, inequality, and injustice in our society, which needs, an urgent redressal. So with that, we welcome Dr. Charania. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you very much, Dr. Walji, for this generous introduction. And thank you, Dr. Aslam Abdullah and Dr. Hassan Walji, to invite me to be on this discussion series, which is discussing about sacrifice of Imam Hussein and the Reformation. Thank you again about the introduction. I'm only, as I said, as Dr. Walji said, I'm a student of comparative religion. And that has been my interest right from almost from the school days because of various reasons. And obviously, I'm not a scholar, as great a scholar as Dr. Aslam Abdullah and Dr. Walji are. They are literally, I think, in their own right, they are not only scholars of religion, but also almost, I would say, polymaths with so many different disciplines that they worked on. Basic objective for all religion, as I've always said, from the temporal aspect is, aside from the spiritual aspect, which is different, on the temporal side, morals, ethos, and value system is what every religion teaches us. And that is what I learned in my studentship, that all the religions are really telling us exactly the same thing, more or less, to be good human being and be helpful to other human beings. And in doing so, I would say all the religions are more or less similar in terms of teachings. And what it taught me is that I think we should respect every single religion, and everyone should stick to their own parents' religion, and no one should be really made to change their religion if possible. With that, let's come to the subject of poverty, which is at hand. Subject of poverty is being discussed almost all over the world. It's a global issue, as Dr. Aslam Abdullah just now said, and he gave us some stark sort of really statistics, which are of the kind which we need to really look deeper into it and see how we can be helpful within the community, outside the community, and perhaps in the at the national level, what can be done, how it can be done, and to be able to resolve this issue if possible. That is really alleviation of the poverty, which is a big job. But whatever we can do, whatever the dent, as Dr. Waji just now said, well, make a difference. Whatever you can do, whatever I can do, everyone should be able to do it, and should perhaps make sure that we make our effort, honest effort in doing so. I think poverty is simply when we cannot meet our basic needs, which were just defined by Dr. Abdullah as well as Dr. Walji. Basic needs are the food, shelter, clothing, education, and health. If that cannot be met, and to be able to meet that, if someone has to borrow some money and resources, well, that's where what is just now being talked about, the dignity. Dignity is lost immediately. If one has to create a hand in which someone puts something as a help, well, dignity is unfortunately lost. When the basic needs are not met, there is hunger, there is malnutrition, education is limited, other services are kind of dented, social discrimination happens, exclusion happens, lack of participation happens, and the decision making one is not included in because of the same situation. Strongest in the wealthiest country like this, I'll add to the statistics that has just been given to you, that 40% of the people in America do not have a sum of $400 if they needed it in emergency. That's a saving. Now we're talking about two different things. One is poverty, when one does not earn or does not have enough money from month to month or check to check every month what is needed. Whatever is left behind, income minus expenditure, everyone knows this, is whatever is left is the saving, and that saving is gradually added one after the other month, one after the other year, and then it becomes kind of an asset or one's wealth. Now, we are not talking about the wealth. I'm talking about wealth is just $400 people do not have to be able to meet the emergency that they may have to face, like someone has died in East Coast or West Coast, someone has got to buy a ticket and go there and participate into the funeral, or there is an emergency, health emergency, or whatever, a car is broken down. So this is the kind of situation. Another situation that was discussed only, I think, yesterday or the day before, is the unhoused people or the homeless people, which are numbering 553,000 in America. In such a wealthy country, we have got 17 people in every 10,000 people who is living under bridge or on the park bench at night. That is how it is. Yet another statistic. This is the statistic, by the way, of the Federal Reserve that I gave you. The statistics of the United Nations, I'll just add one more, and that is, it says that 16% of the people all over the world, and that includes America as well, maybe it is a little less, they do not know when they go to sleep what will they get tomorrow morning to eat, or if they will get it. So that's the hunger. Food security is really not enough for 16%, that is 1 in 6 person living on this planet. And as you were just told, we have got the poverty in this country more than 10%, which is 30 million people are on that poverty list, which is the lowest possible kind of the line that has been drawn. In fact, it is almost double, as Dr. Abdullah just now said, Dr. Aslam Abdullah just now said. Now, let's talk about the mean income. Regular monthly income of a family in USA, which is mean, it is called mean family income, is 63,000 a year is of last year. And that's almost 80% of the families. One can live in that particular amount, probably well enough, not quite well enough, but well, one can make two ends meet and maybe save something as well. And a lot of other people have got lot much more. I mean, maybe 100,000, 200,000, even $500,000. Now, I'll give you just one little sort of, comparison as to what happens. You must have heard a lot of people are billionaires, and particularly Jeff Bezos is being talked about, that he has added to his wealth, sitting at home perhaps, or doing whatever he's doing, not doing something with his hammer or really doing anything in labor. He has added almost just under $1 billion in his wealth in this COVID year, in this year that we've all been suffering. Now think about $1 billion. If 63,000 is what is a mean family income, $1 million can last almost 15 years, more than that. And $1 billion will last 15,000 years. And I repeat it, 15,000 is not a mistake. So now think about it. Is it usable by anyone? Who will live more than 100 years or 200 years or 300 years? And even if one wants to leave something for his progeny or his people, sons, daughters, whatever, 15,000 is almost how many generations? It's really 4,000 generations. Anyway, let's go further. This stockpile of asset is almost unbelievably bad. And this is in Urdu, we call it Zakhira Andozi and all that, you know all about it. This is not allowed in any positive law of any Zakhira Andozi, any stockpiling, but it is done, and we just look at it and think about it. Do not think about it much. Now, leaving that kind of money for your leaving behind, for people who are left behind, it just makes me think, and I'll probably ask this question to hosts and everyone who is involved in this discussion. Have we lost the confidence in God Almighty Allah, that He will not be able to, or He will not give us food tomorrow? And have we lost the confidence in our children, that they will not be able to look after themselves? Think about ourselves. I mean, we are almost all of us, I would say good 90%, 95%, or even 98% are better than what we were at the age of 20, 25, or 30 in terms of money, in terms of resources. So why would our children not be able to do that? What I'm trying to arrive at is that collecting this kind of money and then leaving it behind is not all that necessary. Yes, again, I will not say one should not collect money at all and one should not leave anything behind. But I think it's probably this is beyond beyond correct, beyond right, beyond really acceptable. So that's the second thing. Now, one thing that I'll perhaps add here, that our absolute iman in Allah is that He has created this kainat, not only this planet, not only this planetary system, but the universe, all the stars and its planets, wherever they are. Now, when He sent Hazrat Adam and Bibi Hawa here, the whole planet was available to two people, all the resources of it. Now, when their children and their children from 2 to 4 to 400 to 4,000 to 400,000, the globe or the planet was still available to them. Now, somehow, somewhere, we started becoming possessive. We started being selfish. We started being greedy, that this is what I want, this is what I need. Tell me, and I'll just ask a question. For example, with all the copper in the world, which is a lot in Zambia, who allotted Zambia to those people living there? Or who allotted Saudi Arabia to Arabs, where there's 10 million barrels every day is being produced. Who allotted United States to us living here, Americans? And well, us also came here only for the 200, 300 years ago. Before that, there were indigents. We took it over. We just, became greedy, selfish, and just dispossessed them. So only about 100 years ago, there was no passport, no visa, no nothing. It all started after the First World War, particularly the passport first and the visa later in about 1920s and 30s. Until then, everyone can go everywhere and everyone can just start living there. Today, it's not available. It's not possible. It's the adventure in those days when we started sailing in about 1500, and the greed both coming together. Like Columbus came here in about 1500, and so did Vasco da Gama went to India, and they just started grabbing whatever was available. And I think it's probably it's bad. This is what happened. We did not know, or we did not define all these things at that time, but that's where that's what happened, and it sort of arrived here. Having said that, the estimated minimum level of income is required, as Dr. Abdullah said, is about 25,000 or between 20 and 25,000. But really, in reality, it should be really about 40,000 plus to be able to live correctly. Inequality is increasing, and it is increasing unbelievably. I remember back in 1960s and 70s when I was in England, these things were being discussed in those days. And a CEO was paid maybe about 10 times, at the most 15 times, and as an exceptions, from a floor worker in the factories. Today, that inequality has increased. Floor worker is paid $1. The CEO is paid almost $250 to $300. So inequality is increased to such an extent. And I'll give you one more example, and then I suppose we'll open the floor. You remember in FDR's time, the Great Depression, as they call it, in 1930s, there was really big need of money, and that money had to come from the citizens as income tax. And FDR suggested or proposed in 1931 in his State of Union speech that everything beyond 25,000 must be put as the tax for 100%. The Congress in the same year discussed the proposal, and they accepted 94% income tax in that year. And that almost continued up to, I think, after the Nixon's time, and when it was reduced to 70 and then 60, and then now it's almost 20%. So what happens is that the tax is reduced with ulterior motive of wealthy being more wealthy and poor becoming more poor. That's what is happening. With that, I think we need to probably discuss as to what can be done and what should we be doing ourselves as part of this nation, as the citizens of this and in the world, and where should we be putting our foot down to make sure that we also really we can say, yes, I tried, I made an effort, and whatever was the result, of course, is whatever was acceptable to Allah happened. So here, with that, I will open the floor and request Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Walji to start discussing all these 3-4 subjects that I have started. And of course, I would like to learn from you as well. You are senior scholars, and everyone will learn from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. In fact, you gave wonderful figures about the billions and that are owned by these rich people. I was looking at the numbers that have been issued by banks, that if the interest money of the deposits of the royalty in the Gulf is used to feed the hungry and to raise the the status of people who are living in the poverty line to above the poverty line, perhaps that money can be used for the next 3,000 years. Now, there's so much resources and so much there. And there is a clear mandate that God has created everything that exists in this universe for human beings, for their dignity, to preserve their identity and to save them from all those kind of crises that they go through. But what is very disturbing that in the literature of Islam, and I am referring to the literature that was produced by the Salaf, and I'm referring to the literature that was produced by modern scholars, we do not find much emphasis on the issue of eliminating poverty. We do not find much on the issue of uplifting the dignity of human being. The only call that we often hear is that once you change your religion, your dignity would be enhanced and increased. But that could happen in the eyes of God. But in the world in which we live, we need some physical objects in order to live a dignified life, and that means we should have a house, we should have some food, we should have some shelter. None of that kind of thing is available to those 10.2% people in this country and more than 39% of people in the world of ours. And yet we have those billionaires, and yet we have all those kind of things. So why is it that the religious communities, it doesn't matter whether we are Shias and Sunnis, have failed to come together to address this issue of poverty? And why have Muslim organizations and Muslim Islamic centers not focused on the issue of poverty in general, let alone the poverty among the Muslims itself? Is there anything in our theology that prevents us from saying and identifying with those issues, or is it we who fail to understand that aspect of theology?
Yeah. So as a rejoinder, Dr. Aslam, when we look at, let's look at Muslim societies and us here in the United States. Let's not go far. Mosques will do sometimes the ad hoc down and outs being brought in the winter to the mosque, within the mosque. They will do some fundraising to try and help. What is happening is that we are addressing the symptoms of poverty that we see. And sometimes by giving a few dollars, we feel that we have now done our obligation, and then we move on. We have satisfied our ego and we moved on. The issue is systemic, that if one looks at the cause of that poverty, like we talked about homelessness, the cause and the politics of poverty is something where we, as Muslims, following in the footsteps of the Blessed Prophet, peace be upon him, and Imam Hussain, alayhi salam, that we stand up, for the rights of those and join movements. There are movements which are trying to alleviate, which are trying to do something about poverty. We remain in our cocoons and we then mouth platitudes to say, but zakat is the perfect system. And if we all were to pay zakat, then there will be no poverty in the world. Well, the point is, a lot of people do pay zakat, and yet there is poverty. So the idea is to join and align ourselves as Muslims living in North America, to begin with, to make sure that the Muslim community itself is able to stand on its feet. And that, I believe, is a call for us, that because it forces us to realize that our fellow brothers and sisters in humanity in North America and across the world, in our own neighborhoods, cannot be left alone to deal with it, and that each one of us has a responsibility, and that brings us on to the lack of institution building. We're excellent at building mosques, but we fail when it comes to building institutions which are going to create a strategy or a think tank where we can then align ourselves with others who are trying to fight this. And unless there is that movement by the leadership, unfortunately, we will continue to discuss this on Zoom calls and maybe after COVID in one-to-one, physical meetings that we may have. But the meetings will remain meetings. And as Dr. Charania sometimes reminds me, of the Farsi saying that they came, they sat, they talked, they ate, and they went home. And this is the state where we are at. So the call of the day is to create institutions, to align with others, and maybe there is a way forward.
Yes, I entirely agree with you, Dr. Walji and Dr. Abdullah. I think lots of things that we discuss are only for the discussion purpose, it seems, unfortunately, although, of course, progress is made. But by and large, as you said, it is amdan, guftan, barhastan kind of thing. We came, we discuss, and go away. The exact result, unfortunately, we do not get quickly enough to see that a difference is made. And that's what is important. Okay, we must be able to make a difference. The safety, security, and equality is, as I understand that it is the part of Islam. It is the essential part of Islam, I would call it. Having said that, that is all equity. I think this is probably called masawat, and masawat in the sense that all are equal and everyone remains equal. And to be able to do so, if someone is in trouble, someone is really needy, he should be helped. And that is one of the examples that I think I was reading only a few days ago about Hazrat Ali giving away his ring while being in ruku, while being in prayers. And that's what he did. So if that is the spirit that is being shown, and that is being shown for us to be able to emulate, to copy, how is it that we have either lost it or we have not been able to carry it forward? I think this is what is necessary, and we need to really make sure that we do carry it forward, we do remember it, and do whatever is necessary.
So let me pose a question to both of you and to Dr. Aslam in particular. You have been in the trenches, living in California, and you have been an activist. What would those baby steps be in terms of alleviating, within the mosque, as an imam in a mosque? What would you do, or what do you do, and what can mosques do? Because we need to go to some practicalities in terms of what can be done.
But, the Muslim organizations and some of the Muslim masajid have started distributing some food on a weekly basis to the homeless people or the poor people and all those kind of things. But they have, it has no impact. I mean, besides, of course, feeding a few individuals here and there. I think one of the issues which they have not yet looked at is that the amount of the zakat that Muslims can generate in this country every year runs into billions. And the amount of the Eid al-Fitr zakat that the Sunni Muslims generate also runs into millions. If that amount of money that comes through zakat, that comes through zakat al-Fitr, is pooled to address the issues for poverty in this country in terms of creating jobs, in terms of creating projects that would take the people out of the kind of debt that they have been living in, and to provide them some kind of security, then definitely Muslim community can make itself a benevolent community in this country, a community that is dynamic in terms of addressing the issues. But first of all, the Muslim organizations and the Muslims in this country do not have a unified zakat system. Secondly, whatever system we have, it is not transparent. Thirdly, there is still an ideological debate among Muslims whether the money should be spent on non-Muslims or should be spent only for Muslims. Now, with this kind of narrow understanding, you cannot live the universality of a religion. You cannot. Because you are defeating the very purpose of the universal message and universality of the message and the universal application of the message by confining yourself to a particular sect or to a particular group and to a particular community. And this is the dilemma that Muslims have, that they have not acted as a universal community. They have always acted as a narrowly defined and very limited kind of sectarian community that concerns only people who are within its own circle and shell. And unless we change our perspective from a theological perspective, as well as from a practical perspective, we can say whatever we want to say about our religion, and we can quote whatever we want to quote about the Prophet and about the Imam Hussein. Things are not going to change. Let us be very clear about that. And America is perhaps one of those few countries which inspires us that things can change. The theology can be challenged, and ideas can be implemented, and change can take place in the practical sense of the term. So if the scholars of the two communities or activists of the two communities come together and then work to address these issues that we have been talking about, whether it is poverty and homelessness, rather than talking about whether what was done in the last 1400 years is justified by Muslims to themselves, we will never reach to any kind of conclusion. These things, those people who have made up their mind, they would never change their minds. But if we come together to address these issues, then perhaps we can develop confidence on each other's ability to bring about changes in the society as a whole. And then universality of the message of Islam can be lived on. But right now, I think the kind of status that we have, we can't even take care of our own self. Look at the crisis that we have, that Muslim organizations, relief organizations, generate close to $1 billion every year in this country. 90% of that is spent outside the United States. While we have poverty among African Americans, while we have more than 30 or 40% African American men incarcerated, where the poverty looms so large that they are unable to feed themselves. Homelessness is quite rampant. All those kind of issues. So a community that does not even understand its own universality and does not live that universality within its own theology, it cannot be of much help and much support to the communities, regardless of what we say about ourselves and how much we pat ourselves for feeding 100 people or 200 people. Yes, it's better than nothing, but this is not this community was expected to. And I think perhaps we may have to look at our theology also. We may have to look at our own way, the way we define our universality.
Dr. Sharania.
Yes, I think this seems that we are defining the issues or issues at two levels that can be addressed. One is getting interfaith cooperation, unity, and making sure that we can all do it together. But the day before yesterday, I think Dr. Hux, what he told me, I'm normally an optimist, almost a stubborn optimist. But what I heard from him, it was really distressing that we probably cannot work together, and we have not been able to work together. But I think one has got to keep on trying. That's one. Secondly, I think at the level of one-to-one basis with people, we have to try and make sure that the opportunities are available to people who need it. Those who really cannot meet the needs, they are ready to work, but how can they work if they haven't got the opportunities? Opportunities have got to be made available to them. Education, which is a necessity in this day and age to be able to do anything, that should be made available to them. If necessary, a capital must be made available to them if someone wants to do a business. Know-how is yet another thing, that know-how about a vocation or a profession or work, any work. Psychological support, encouragement, motivation. I mean, there's so many different things that can be given on one-on-one basis. And that is, for that, we need unity within ourselves and try and make sure that we then provide these things to those who deserve it, those who need it, and make sure that they are standing on their own feet and they do not have to extend their hand to someone else to ask for some help. Once in a while, it may be all right, but it should not be on a regular basis. And we should be able to do that in this country, particularly where it's such a large wealth is available and resources available.
Thank you, Dr. Charania. As we come to almost time, we have about 8 or 9 minutes to go. I'd like to take this discussion at a spiritual level, because obviously we see the challenges, and whether we are able to accomplish this would depend on whether we come together as one single Muslim community in North America, looking at our Muslim brothers and sisters who are marginalized, and we need to build institutions. We need to create that environment. And in order to create an environment of that nature, there is also some place for spirituality to be able to have that passion, or for that passion to touch us. Because on the one hand, poverty can mean failure to generate wealth, which is what we have just discussed. On the other, poverty in terms of spirituality also is a reflection on our limits. And as Dr. Charania mentioned, that sometimes we lose that, have we lost that hope that the Razak is Allah, that He's going to provide the risk? That this is a reflection on our limits, of our absolute need and a feeling of reliance on Allah. And that actually leaves no place for any kind of even arrogance or self-admiration for those who have. And because whatever we have, or whatever is at our disposal, we need to understand belongs to God and has been given to us as a trust for a short period of time, be it the copper in Zambia or the oil in Saudi Arabia. This is a trust that humanity holds to be able to do something. And as we are in these days of Muharram, and looking at the social justice movement that was started by Imam Hussain alayhi salam, in one of his famous du'as, which is called the Du'a Arafah, and the du'as of the Imams were teaching moments for us. And in that Du'a Arafah, he says, and I quote, that what can I bring when I want to come to you? Ya Allah, what can I bring when I want to come to you? Can I come with my ears, my eyes, my tongue, my hands, my feet? Is not this the case, that all of these are gifts that you have given me? So what am I coming to you with? And then he says, and this is astounding, the more we reflect on these words, it tells us as to the arrogance must go away, and that possessiveness needs to go away. When he says in that same dua, that how can I be poor when you have made me rich with your generosity? So there is that upliftment of human dignity that we talked about, that whatever the state may be, there needs to be also a place where that human dignity is given through that inspiration, because we're all needy. Only God is rich and free of need. And many people do not understand this, but Imam Hussain declared that he totally understood this, wanted us to understand it, and he wanted to use it as a means to get nearer to God, which really also is part and parcel of spirituality. The holistic faith that we have when we serve humanity is not only physical, it's not only material, but it is also interacting with our fellow humans at a spiritual level. That man that one would see in that rain with tattered shoes was also looking, or is also looking, for some solace, some spirituality, some human dignity, and we also have that we are able to share. So this is obviously something that we need to look at, because great emphasis has been put on spiritual poverty. I mean, Rumi goes on praising those who are humble in themselves in contrast to those who are arrogant. In the example of someone who has not established humbleness in themselves, Rumi says, is like the one who drinks poisonous wine. In the beginning, he may feel happy and joyful, but after a few minutes or after a while, he will certainly collapse. So, those are the spiritual moments that we need to look at and try and understand that there is a spiritual aspect, that poverty is also an awareness of our absolute need and dependence on God. Had He not been merciful and He not given the blessings, I could have been standing on that street corner in the position that that man was. And as long as we are cognizant of that need, then that sense of poverty, which happens to be a spiritual gift in some ways, needs to be maintained forever. So this is a reflection on my part in terms of the spiritual part of poverty, which cannot be left undiscussed when you are discussing physical poverty. And we'll take some last comments, both from Dr. Aslam and Dr. Barkat, before we close.
Let me, if I may, let me try and connect what you said just now about the spiritual versus and the physical aspects of the two things. For example, and a lot of us sit in the so-called bandagi, or whatever we want to call it, yoga, or a number of people do that, and they try and keep their thoughts absolutely, all the thoughts out of the mind, and just talk about or think about or just keep on doing it in the sense of that bandagi or that zikr, or we just keep on doing that in the name of Allah. And we also always find, by and large, that we cannot concentrate more than a minute or 2 or 3 or 4 at the most, and something creeps into our mind. So it really proves in a way that thoughts are not in our control. So if the thoughts of being able to do something, a project, or being able to be a doctor or a lawyer or a business, so those thoughts are also really given by that Almighty into our brain. And that's what we follow. So if those thoughts makes us successful and collect a lot of wealth, that is also a trust that has been given to us by Almighty Allah. And I think it is incumbent upon us that we share it with that creation of God Almighty, which is all around us, and there needs to be fulfilled, which are not fulfilled. We must share our successes with them. And that's, I think, what you are saying, spiritual. Well, connect the spiritual with the physical and make sure that you can do it, and we should do it.
Some final words of wisdom.
Yes, I fully understand what you're saying, but I think the power elites have often tried to deflect the attention from the physical poverty by bringing the issue of spirituality, that rely on God and focus on Him, and then He would reward you in the life hereafter. Yes, we believe that it's part of belief, but this is not a part of the solution. The part of the solution is that that poverty that an individual has been forced to live is a man-made poverty. It is not something that is divinely structured. There are enough resources in our world to feed everyone. But those resources have not been utilized and distributed in a manner that would eliminate poverty in our world. What prevents the Imam of Mecca asking the rulers to take the interest of the money that they have put in the banks in the United States and spend it on development projects in places where people are living in poverty? I'm not even talking here about the validity of the concept of interest or riba and all those kind of things. Forget about that kind of issue at this moment. But what prevents them to question that? What prevents them to question that why you are spending billions and billions of dollars on building castles that you would not be able to use even for a day in your life, and yet your people are sleeping hungry? So I think that poverty that exists is not a divinely made poverty. It is a man-made poverty. And those people who claim to be people of God have failed to raise that issue and consciousness within the people, and they have found a very simple solution. Give 2.5% of what you have, and the problem is solved. Give 5% of what you have, and the problem is solved. No, the problem is not solved by giving 2.5%. Problem is solved when you eliminate poverty. And if it takes 50% of your resources or 70% of your resources, do that. This is not the spirit that our theologians have told us. They basically focus on the forms, not the content and the essence of the faith. That basically talks of creating a society, as you rightly put it in the beginning, based on the dignity of human being, and that dignity ensures that people should not sleep hungry. That dignity ensures that people should have a shelter, a roof on their head, and that means that they have the ability to raise a family in dignity. And those things are not available to those 10.5% of people in this country and nearly 39% of the people in the world over today. And yet we have churches, we have mosques, we have synagogues, we have temples, and everyone is singing the praise of God. So there is a dichotomy, and the dichotomy is with us, not with God, not with the resources of God. And I think that is something that we need to realize. And those who realize that they are limited, they do whatever they best they can do, but they can't change the structures. They can't change the system. And, you know, theologians who keep on telling us they cannot even question the power elites because their sustenance is dependent on them. So with that, inshallah, we come to a conclusion, and hopefully we will have Dr. Charania again and again on our shows and our discussions, because the path that we have taken would not come to an end by the end of the 10th of Muharram. It would inshallah continue. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Charania, for your wonderful presentation and your graceful acceptance of our invitation. And thank you, Dr. Walji, for introducing him to the Islamic City audience. So with that, inshallah, we would conclude tonight's program, and then let's recite Surah Al-Asr. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask you to help us understand your faith in the right manner and give us the inspiration to live it in our lives. Subhana Rabbil Izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin.